The moment Dennis Buckley pressed his mouth against the alien queen's lips, he felt something crack inside his chest. Not a bone, not cartilage, something deeper, something that had no name in any language he knew. It was as if a door he never knew existed had been kicked open from the other side, and whatever rushed through it was hot, bright, and absolutely not interested in asking permission. 3 hours earlier, he had been eating rehydrated pasta in the cafeteria of Cradle Station, arguing with Pat Givens about whether a hot dog was a sandwich. "It is structurally a taco," Dennis had insisted, waving his fork with the confidence of a man who had clearly thought about this too much. "Bread on 2 sides, filling in the middle. That is a taco." Pat had stared at him with the patient expression of someone who had been married for 15 years. "You are the reason people do not take this station seriously," Pat had replied, not looking up from his tray. That was the kind of day it had been. Ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of day Dennis preferred, because remarkable days in space usually meant someone was dying or something was on fire, and he had seen enough of both during his years as a military paramedic. Cradle Station orbited Earth at a comfortable distance, a diplomatic outpost where humans and alien delegations met to discuss trade, territories, and the occasional philosophical disagreement. Dennis had been working there for 2 years as a life support technician, which sounded important but mostly meant he checked oxygen filters and occasionally fixed a toilet. He had taken the job because it was quiet, the pay was decent, and after 8 years of pulling wounded soldiers out of burning vehicles, adjusting thermostats felt like paradise. He was not a hero. He wanted to be very clear about that. He was a 34-year-old man from Delaware who was afraid of heights, which was ironic for someone in orbit, and who owned more pairs of comfortable socks than any situation called for. He had a crooked jaw from a high school baseball accident, freckles that made him look younger than he was, and a habit of talking too much when nervous. Back on Earth, he had been the kind of person who blended into the background of his own life. No close family to speak of. A few friends who sent messages on his birthday and forgot about him the rest of the year. He had joined the military at 19 because he did not know what else to do with himself, and he had been good at being a paramedic because caring for strangers was easier than figuring out why he could not seem to care about his own future. The Vailani delegation had arrived that morning. Dennis watched them come aboard from the observation deck. The Vailani were beautiful in a way that made his brain stutter. Their skin was golden amber, warm like sunlight trapped under glass, and it glowed, not metaphorically, actually glowed, as if they had swallowed small stars and the light was leaking through their pores. Their eyes were large, the color of honey held up to a lamp, and their hair ran in shades of dark copper and bronze. There were 6 of them, 5 advisors, and then there was her, Navi. She moved differently from the others. While her attendants walked with measured steps, Navi looked around the docking bay with open curiosity, amber eyes jumping from surface to surface. She paused to touch the wall with her fingertips, and the metal warmed where she made contact. She was tall, taller than Dennis, with dark copper hair that seemed to move on its own, stirred by heat radiating from her skin. She wore robes of deep red and gold that caught the light and threw it back in scattered patterns. Pat elbowed him in the ribs. "You have that look," Pat said quietly. "What look?" Dennis replied, still staring. "The look of a man about to do something profoundly stupid," Pat answered. The welcoming ceremony took place in the central atrium. Diplomats made speeches. Hands were shaken. Dennis stood near the back, fidgeting with his wrinkled uniform jacket. He was not important enough to be at the front. The ceremony was 15 minutes old when it happened. Navi had been standing beside her advisors when her expression changed, a tightening around her eyes, a tremor in her hands. Then her skin flickered. The warm golden glow dimmed like a candle in a draught, surged back, then dimmed again. The old Vailani beside her, the one Dennis would later learn was named Dorin, leaned close and said something urgent. Navi shook her head. Then her knees buckled. Dennis did not think. His body moved before his brain caught up. He pushed through the crowd, past a security officer, past a diplomat, and dropped to his knees beside her. Up close, she was burning. The heat was intense enough to make him lean back. but her glow was fading, pulling inward toward the center of her chest, like water circling a drain.
Dorin, what is happening to her?
Dennis asked Dorin. His voice came out steady, which surprised him because his hands were shaking. Dorin's ancient face was terrified. Her core is failing, Dorin said in careful English. The thermal center. Here. He pressed a trembling hand to Navy's chest. It gives us life, heat, light. Without it, she goes cold. She dies. How long? Dennis asked. Minutes, Dorin whispered. The medical team was arriving with human equipment, defibrillators, oxygen masks. None of it would work on Vailani physiology. Is there a treatment? Dennis pressed. Something your people do? Dorin hesitated. There is an old ritual, a transfer of vital heat through direct contact, mouth to mouth, forcing the warmth of your life into hers. He looked at Dennis with eyes that held centuries of knowledge and very little hope. No human has ever done this. I do not know what it would do to you. Dennis looked at Navy. Her copper hair had gone dull. The glow in her chest was the size of a fist, pulsing weakly, and with each pulse it grew smaller. He stopped thinking. He cupped her face in both hands, felt the dying heat against his palms, and pressed his mouth to hers. Nothing happened for a horrible moment. Then something grabbed hold of him from the inside. Heat rushed upward through his torso, gathered in his throat, and poured out of him. Not air. Something that felt like the center of who he was being siphoned through a straw. Navy's body arched. The glow in her chest flared, exploded outward, and the entire atrium flooded with golden light so intense Dennis could see it through his closed eyelids. He saw flashes he could not explain. A red desert under twin suns, a city made of light, a child laughing in a language he did not speak but somehow understood. Then it was over. He pulled back, gasping. His hands were glowing, a warm light pulsing under his skin, threading through his veins like liquid gold. Navi opened her eyes. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse and bewildered. "Dennis," he managed. "Dennis Buckley, life support tech." He paused. "I fix toilets." Despite everything, the corner of her mouth twitched. The next 3 days were a blur of medical examinations and diplomatic panic. Navi recovered quickly. Dennis did not. The changes started small. By the first evening, his eyes hurt in dim light. By the second day, his hands were warm in a way that felt wrong. He held a cup of water, and it heated in his grip. He touched metal and left condensation where his palm had been. Pat noticed first. "You are running a fever," Pat said, pressing the back of his hand against Dennis's forehead in the engineering bay. "I am not sick," Dennis replied, pulling away. "Your skin could fry an egg," Pat observed. "That is not normal." The doctors took 9 tubes of blood and then stared at the results like they were reading a novel in a language none of them spoke, Dennis said, rubbing his hands together. "They have no idea what is happening." Pat sat beside him in companionable silence. After a while, he spoke. "My wife asked if the aliens were friendly. I told her they were pretty and that you had kissed one. She said that sounded about right." Dennis laughed despite himself, and the warmth in his hands flared. Lieutenant Roxanne Fay arrived at his quarters on the 3rd morning, blonde hair in a bun so tight it looked painful, uniform flawless, expression granite. "Mr. Buckley, you are to report to Medical Bay 7 for quarantine assessment." "I have been to medical 3 times, Dennis pointed out from his bunk. "Your blood work shows anomalous protein structures," Roxanne replied, her blue eyes like targeting lasers. "Your core temperature has risen over 2 degrees with no infection. You are, by any reasonable definition, a biohazard." Dennis went to quarantine, a small room with white walls, a cot, a glass window, and nothing else. He sat on the cot and stared at his hands, which were definitely glowing again, pulsing amber in time with his heartbeat. The fear was not the sharp, useful kind he had known as a paramedic. This was the slow kind that whispered, "Your body is not your own anymore." Navi came that evening, appearing on the other side of the glass. "They told me you were being kept here," she said, each English word placed with care. "Because of what I did to you." "You did not do anything," Dennis replied. "I did it to myself. Nobody asked me to play hero." "You are afraid," Navi observed. He opened his mouth to deny it, then stopped. Something about the honest concern in her amber eyes made lying feel pointless. Yes, I am afraid. She pressed her palm against the glass. I am afraid also, Nevi said quietly. I have been afraid since I woke up and saw your face, because I knew what the ritual does. Not to you, to us, both of us. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had the texture of someone confessing something they had been holding alone for too long. Among my people, when someone gives their warmth to save another, it is not a small thing. It is not medicine. It is a piece of yourself handed over. And you did it without hesitation for a stranger, and now I cannot stop thinking about what kind of person does that. Dennis did not know how to answer that, so he said nothing, and the silence between them was warm. That was the first honest conversation they had. It would not be the last. A pattern developed. Dennis was confined to a limited area and required to spend hours in medical observation. Because the connection between him and Navy needed studying, they were expected to spend time in proximity under supervised conditions. Navy was not what he expected. She asked too many questions. She interrupted. She got frustrated when she could not find the right English word and would wave her hands trying to grab it from the air. Why do humans eat cold food on purpose? Navy asked during one session. Not all food is better hot, Dennis explained. That is objectively wrong, Navy replied with absolute conviction. Have you ever had ice cream? Dennis asked. She narrowed her eyes. What is ice cream? Frozen sweetness, one of the best things humans have invented. You would eat something frozen, Navy said, and the disgust was so genuine that Dennis laughed for the first time since the incident. The warmth in his chest surged, the glow in his palms brightened, and the medical technician scribbled something on her tablet. But the changes accelerated. By the 5th day, Dennis could see heat. Warm objects had an amber shimmer. Cold objects looked hollow. When Pat visited, Dennis could see warmth radiating off his friend like a golden aura. Your eyes used to be more green than gold, Pat observed. Dennis checked his reflection. Pat was right. His eyes were shifting from hazel green to something richer, luminous. His freckles were fading. His skin had taken on a warmth that had not been there before. I'm turning into one of them, Dennis said flatly. You are turning into something, Pat agreed. But maybe not what you think. The fear got worse at night. Dennis would lie in the dark, feeling his body hum with energy that was not his. His heartbeat had changed. There was a secondary rhythm beneath it, a deeper pulse from the center of his chest, exactly where Navy's thermal core was located. He was developing one of his own. Navy found ways to visit outside supervised hours. She sat on her side of the quarantine glass, and he sat on his, and they talked. She told him about red deserts, stretching for thousands of miles under twin suns, cities built from crystallized light that sang when the wind blew through them. The Vailani people, who measured lives in centuries and had 37 words for different kinds of grief and only one for joy. 37 kinds of grief, Dennis repeated. That is incredibly depressing. It is incredibly precise, Navy corrected. Grief is complicated, joy is not. She told him about becoming queen, her mother dying when Navy was young by Vailani standards, the crown falling to her because there was no one else, spending her reign trying to live up to a role she never wanted. Everyone assumes I am strong because I am queen, Navy whispered one night, forehead against the glass. They see the crown and see strength. They do not see that the crown is the heaviest thing I have ever carried. Dennis pressed his palm against the glass, aligning it with hers. I do not see a crown, he said. I just see a person who is tired and honest, and way too opinionated about food temperature. Her laugh was quiet and warm, and it cracked something open inside him he had not realized was sealed shut. On the 8th day, Dorian requested a private meeting. The old Vailani looked smaller somehow. He sat across from Dennis in the medical bay, his faded amber eyes avoiding contact. There is something I must tell you, Dorian began, then stopped. He folded his hands, unfolded them. Dennis recognized the body language of someone about to deliver terrible news. Just say it, Dennis said gently. The ritual was not merely a transfer of heat. Among our people, it is called the binding. Sacred. Permanent. Doran paused. You and Navi are bound now, biologically. Your thermal cores are synchronized. If you are separated by too great a distance, both cores destabilize. You would both die. The silence that followed was the loudest sound Dennis had ever heard. Did Navi know? Dennis asked. His voice was very calm. He did not feel calm. No, Doran said. I did not tell her. In the moment, I thought only of saving her. The consequences seemed distant compared to watching my queen die. I was wrong to hide it. Dennis sat with the knowledge that he was permanently connected to an alien queen, that his DNA was rewriting itself, that he could never go home. He expected rage. He waited for it. But what came was a strange, quiet clarity. He had spent 2 years on this station running from nothing in particular. He had left the military not because of trauma, but because of numbness. He had fixed toilets and eaten rehydrated pasta, because safe, small things could not hurt him. And now he was connected, bound, changed at the molecular level by a decision made in 3 seconds. The terrifying truth was that he did not feel trapped. He felt found. Naivi's reaction was less philosophical. When Doran told her, the temperature in the medical bay rose 11 degrees in 4 seconds. The glass of water on the table boiled. Doran's robes began to smoke. You let him bind himself to me without knowing what it meant, Navi said, and her voice was not a whisper or a shout. It was flat, controlled. The voice of a queen exercising every ounce of restraint to avoid incinerating the person she loved most. He saved my life, Navi continued, and I have ruined his. The crack in her voice was audible. Dennis found her on the observation deck an hour later, standing before the window showing the rotating Earth. Her light was dim for the first time since he had met her. You did not ruin my life, Dennis said from the doorway. You do not have to say that, Navi replied without turning. Before this station, I was not living. I was existing. I did not notice the difference until everything got terrifying and confusing, and I realized that terrifying and confusing is the most alive I have felt in years. Navi turned. Her amber eyes were bright, with unshed tears. You cannot go home. I did not want to go home. I had socks, really good socks, that was about it. He held out his hand. His palm glowed with amber light that matched hers. Navi looked at it for a long time. Then she took it. The warmth that flowed between them was gentle. A conversation between 2 fires learning each other's rhythm. Roxanne ended it within 24 hours. She was not acting out of malice. She had data showing Dennis's DNA rewriting in real time, new protein structures in no known genome, electromagnetic fields interfering with equipment. She presented her case to Station Commander Torres with military precision. Separation, Roxanne recommended. Move Buckley to the isolation wing, full quarantine. If you separate them, they both die, Doran said from the corner. The binding requires proximity. We have only your word for that, Roxanne replied. You have already demonstrated a willingness to deceive. Torres made the call. Dennis was moved. He felt the distance immediately. Not a sudden collapse, but a dimmer switch being turned down. The warmth in his chest began to fade. By the 2nd hour, he was cold, genuinely cold for the first time since the ritual. By the 4th hour, the glow in his hands was gone, and his fingertips were turning blue. Pat came. He could not prevent the transfer, but he was the kind of friend who showed up when showing up was all he could do. You look terrible, Pat said through the glass. Someone turned off the sun inside me, Dennis replied through chattering teeth. On the other side of the station, Navi was fading too, her glow dimming, temperature dropping. Her attendants frightened. Pat went to Roxanne. He found her in the security office, reviewing feeds. She looked tired, shadows under her eyes that had not been there a week ago. When you were 12 and your house caught fire, Pat said, and Roxanne went very still. You ran back inside for your brother. Everyone told you not to, but you went because he was in there. How do you know about that? Roxanne asked carefully. Your file. You were burned, 3rd degree, arms and back, a year of surgeries, and somewhere in those hospital beds, You decided nothing would ever be out of your control again. Because control meant safety. Pat paused. You are a good officer, but right now you are letting 2 people die because the situation is uncontrollable, and that terrifies you. You do not understand the risks, Roxanne said, but her granite edge was gone. I understand that a man who fixed my toilet last week is freezing to death because your fear is louder than the evidence, Pat replied. His voice was steady, warm. I understand that you are afraid, and that your fear is real and that it is killing them. Roxanne stared at the monitoring feeds. Dennis curled on his cot, blue-lipped, Navy dimming in her quarters. She picked up her communicator. Security, this is Lieutenant Fay. Release Buckley. Escort him to the diplomatic wing. Dennis barely made it. Security officers practically carried him. His legs were failing, vision tunneling. They brought him to Navy's quarters. The door opened and heat hit him like walking into sunlight. Navy was on the floor, wrapped in thermal fabric, glow barely visible. Doran knelt beside her. Dennis dropped to his knees and took her hand. Heat erupted between them, a surge so intense it was blinding. Golden light raced up his arm and across her body simultaneously. The secondary heartbeat in his chest roared back. Navy's glow blazed. He could feel her heartbeat as if it were his own. Her fear, her relief, her guilt, all of it pouring through the connection like water through a broken dam. And she could feel him. He knew because her eyes widened with an expression that said she could see past the jokes and the nervous talking and the comfortable socks down to the quiet, frightened core of who he was.
You came back,
Navy whispered. I was always going to come back, Dennis replied, and his voice broke because it was true, and true things sometimes break you open when you say them out loud. She wrapped her arms around him, and the heat between them equalized, found its rhythm. 2 fires feeding each other, 2 cores beating in sync. Dennis buried his face in her shoulder, and the warmth that surrounded him was not just thermal. It was the warmth of being held by someone who understood what it cost to keep going, someone who carried her own impossible weight and still had room to hold his. He could feel her breathing. He could feel the steady pulse of her core matching his, and in that synchronization was a language more honest than any words either of them had ever spoken. Doran watched from the corner and wept silently, because some moments are too sacred for observation. Roxanne came to see Dennis 3 days later. He was on the observation deck with Navy beside him, close enough that their arms touched. The glow in his skin had become permanent, a subtle amber warmth. His eyes had completed their shift to luminous gold. He did not look entirely human anymore, but he did not look Vailani either, something new. I am not going to apologize for doing my job, Roxanne said from the doorway. The risks were real. I know, Dennis said, but I let my fear override my judgment. People nearly died because of it. That is something I will carry. Dennis saw the faint scars on her arms, silvery under the lights. You carry enough already, he said quietly. Put this one down. Something melted in her ice-blue eyes. She nodded once and left. The weeks that followed were strange and beautiful. Dennis's transformation stabilized somewhere between human and Vailani. His skin kept its golden warmth. His amber eyes remained. The secondary heartbeat behind his ribs beat alongside his human heart, 2 rhythms interlocking into something that was both. He could not go home. He accepted this with less grief than expected and more than he showed. Delaware felt like a story someone had told him once. My wife asked me to describe you now, Pat said one evening, wiping grease off a wrench. I told her you look like Dennis, but someone left him in the sun too long. Dennis laughed. That is weirdly accurate. She also wants to know if you and the Queen are. Pat made a vague gesture with the wrench. I do not know what that gesture means, Dennis lied. Yes, you do, Pat replied. The word is partners, or maybe the word is home. Someone does not have to be a place. Dennis stared at his friend, at this calm, grease-stained man who contained more wisdom in his quiet observations than Dennis had accumulated in 34 years. On their last evening aboard Cradle Station, Dennis and Navy stood together at the observation window. Earth hung below, blue and white and beautiful. Are you sad? Navy asked. watching his reflection. Dennis considered this. He thought about Delaware, the socks, the pasta, the arguments about hot dogs. A little, but not the way I expected. It is not the sadness of losing something. It is the sadness of outgrowing something, like a kid looking at a playground and realizing he is too tall for the slide. Navy leaned her head against his shoulder. Her warmth seeped into him, and his rose to meet it. And in the space where they merged was the opposite of loneliness. "You are strange," Navy murmured. "You have 37 words for grief, and think ice cream is an abomination," Dennis replied. "You do not get to call anyone strange." She laughed, that warm, quiet laugh that cracked him open every time. And he realized this was it. The one Vailani word for joy that did not need subdividing. Simple, unmistakable. Dennis Buckley, life support technician, toilet repairman, former paramedic from Delaware, looked at the stars with golden eyes that were no longer entirely his own, and felt, for the first time in 34 years, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not because the universe had chosen him, not because of destiny or prophecy, but because he had, in one unthinking moment, chosen to kneel beside a stranger and offer her the warmth of his own life, and that choice had rewritten everything. The stars burned outside the window, ancient and patient, and the light they cast was golden. And that was the end of today's story. If you listened all the way through, let me know what you thought in the comments. Your feedback means a lot. Don't forget to like, subscribe for more stories like this, and check out the next video on your screen. Big hug and see you next time.